Hello and welcome to The Steamy, the Scotsman's politics podcast. We're 3 weeks into the Holyrood election campaign. We're all out on the road. I'm recording this from my car, so I hope it works. And things are really heating up, I think it's fair to say. During a Channel 4 leaders' debate on Tuesday evening, Scottish Labour leader Anna Sawar attacked Malcolm Offord, the leader of Reform UK in Scotland, over immigration and claims of racism within Mr Offord's party. Seemingly in retaliation, Malcolm Offord alleged that Anna Sawar's claims were very different when he came, in his words, bouncing up to him after the pair appeared on a Question Time episode together at the beginning of the campaign, and said they need to work together, Reform and Labour, to remove the SNP. The SNP, of course, jumping all over this claim with barely concealed glee, plays right into their narrative of some kind of dodgy backroom deal between Labour and Reform. But on Wednesday morning, Anna Sawar told journalists the claims were utter, complete nonsense. He said that Malcolm Offord is a liar. There's no deal, no stitch-up, no nothing. He said he wants Reform to be hammered at the election. He also wants to get rid of the SNP. But I was in Falkirk this morning with Malcolm Offord, who doubled down on the story and gave this account.
Shows, I was just standing with Max, and just as people were leaving, Annas came on his own, without his minders, popped over just to say goodbye. I remember exactly what he said. He said, instantly moved to Reform. He said, I always saw you as more of a unionist than a Tory, Malcolm. I remember that line. And he said, look, you're going to do well in the election, you're going to win a lot of seats. At some point, we need to get together and talk about how we work together, Reform and Reform and Labour, to get rid of the SNP. Turned down his heel and left, and off he went. And that was it. And I remember just turning to Max and saying, wow, I mean, that's incredible. You can... Yeah. That's politics. We're going to learn this game fast. This is politics, that you can be on national TV and absolutely lambasted and then bounce over as if nothing's happened and friendly chat and working together. Yeah.
That was Malcolm Offord talking about this alleged suggestion that Anna Sawar had made to him about working together to get rid of the SNP. And just in the interest of balance as well, this is what Anna Sawar was telling journalists in the spin room after the Channel 4 leaders debate last night.
Look, I mean, utter nonsense. This is desperation from a party whose campaign is completely flunked, and the very idea, and look, let's be honest about it, these are guys that said, one, they've done tens of thousands of pounds of adverts, question my loyalty to Scotland. Thomas Kerr himself at the first Billboard launch said that they were going to run the adverts again. Then they said, oh, they wouldn't. And one of their candidates says they want to deport all Muslims, which would include my kids as well. The idea that there's any kind of back channel chats or deals is for the birds. And frankly, for John Swinney to jump upon it when he's happy to call out the lies of Reform elsewhere and happy to call out the racism of Reform elsewhere, but somehow when it's racism against me, he's going to try and pretend we're doing a deal with them. Come on. Our politics is better than that, and frankly, I thought John Swinney was better than that. I can understand why politically he might think it's a good thing to do, but I think he needs to take a long, hard look at himself in the mirror.
That was Anna Sawar, the leader of Scottish Labour. And Andrew, what do you make of this row? Because it's probably the most interesting story of the week in terms of the election, and it's kind of some quite explosive claims in terms of how damaging it could be for Scottish Labour at a moment when they're already struggling.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is quite damaging for them. I guess in the sense it makes it look like Anna Sawar isn't being honest, doesn't it? And it looks like he's putting on a different front to the public than he does in private to Malcolm Offord. So I think it's a big issue. I mean, you could barely, or John Swinney could barely hide the delight, couldn't he, when it happened in the debate? He was pretty chipper after that, and you could see it with the kind of SNP spin machine. They jumped into action. They were like absolutely delighted with it. I mean, I think there is an element of it. How much would you trust what Malcolm Offord's saying? Because obviously, there's a little bit of we need to take what politicians say with a pinch of salt. And obviously, the SNP before then have been saying you can't trust Reform, you can't trust the word they say, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh wait, you can definitely trust them on this. So there's a bit of an element like that, but I think seeing what Malcolm Offord said today seemed quite believable, and he seemed quite relaxed about the story. and having spoken to Anna Sawar before, you can imagine him saying it a bit as a kind of throwaway comment, perhaps not meaning it so much, just being like, oh, we both need to work together to get rid of the SNP. So acting like it was a proper deal is perhaps not the right way to frame it, and I feel like that's what Malcolm Offord was kind of trying to get across in the debate. But you can definitely imagine Anna Sawar would have said that. Obviously, he's going to deny it, but yeah, it doesn't help Labour at all. I'm not sure I'm not sure how much it helps Reform, but at least it's probably given Malcolm Offord the strongest moment of the campaign, which for him hasn't gone very well so far.
Yeah, it definitely seemed that Malcolm Offord kind of had it up his sleeve and was sort of preparing to use it if Anna Sawar started making those kind of allegations of racism within Reform again. It's something that Anna Sawar has brought up previously. It was quite a powerful moment of that debate. He was referring to comments that I think a kind of Reform candidate in Scotland had retweeted on Twitter about British Muslims, and he was saying to Malcolm Offord, your candidate wants to deport my children. Where do you want them to go? It was quite a kind of powerful moment. But David, you were talking to John Swinney today, and you were kind of asking him about this. And John Swinney, I mean, there's been lots of memes going about social media of John Swinney's reaction in that debate when this was said. It's kind of like comical, sort of half delighted shock on his face. But what was he saying this morning about it?
Yeah, so I was actually in the green room when it all kicked off as well. It's quite funny, like Reform's team kind of celebrated it like their team had scored a goal. They were very happy with it. They were all cheering. The SNP's team were like literally jaws on the floor. They couldn't believe their luck, I think. John Swinney last night came kind of strutting into the green room. He wanted to speak to journalists. We were told he wouldn't actually be saying much. We thought we wouldn't get to hear from him, but he came in and basically said, "Oh, I warned you that they would be doing some sort of deal." This morning, though, asked him about this, about why would you trust Malcolm Offord, given how much you've told people not to trust him. And he kind of walked it back a little bit, saying, well, it's up to them to explain, to Reform and Labour to explain their positions on this. So very much a hands-off approach this morning, letting them kind of beat each other up and sit on the sidelines. But last night he was very animated, as Andrew mentioned. And yeah, he was just, I think this is just what the SNP needed. They don't have to do anything. They just watch these two fight. Even the suggestion that Anna Sawar might talk to Malcolm Offord about this helps him. It makes Anna Sawar look quite daft, to be perfectly honest, and the last thing he kind of needed in this campaign, which hasn't really got up and running yet, and he's running out of time to turn things around.
Rachel, what did you make of this?
Yeah, I think the most surprising thing is perhaps that we've had a TV leaders debate that's actually produced a newsline. It's actually something for us to talk about after a TV leaders debate, because they have become quite dry and quite stale off of late. But yeah, this particular image of John Swinney, the delight on his face, I wonder if we get to the election, it's the day after the election, and the SNP have won with a comfortable number, I wonder if that's the picture that we'll go back to, and wonder if that's where it all started to unravel, perhaps for the other parties here. Very interesting to see how everyone's reacting to it today, though, because it is a case of he said, I suppose, isn't it? It is just a bit of a difficult one to know who to trust, who is telling the truth. Regardless, though, it is obviously a difficult one for Anna Sawar to explain him with his way out of at this point in time. So, and you do have to feel a little bit for Anna Sawar here, because he was trying to make a very valid point about immigration, about comments that he made about his children. You could see he was getting quite emotional about it. And just all of it just got completely sidelined by this comment by Malcolm Offord. So any kind of emotional sort of gravity that Anna Sawar was trying to put onto this point about immigration just got completely lost by the rest of it. I should say that, of course, there was other party leaders at this debate who we haven't really spoken about much because there was such an obvious newsline out of this one. But it was good to see Gillian Mackay, good to see a woman on the panel, because I've had quite a few hustings events, leadership debates where there hasn't been any women, and it's always been men in suits shouting over one another and getting very angry at each other. So it was nice to see that was not always the case last night. And also I think it was quite nice as well where she made a comment about, immigrants are human too, and everyone was shouting over each other at this point, and then she just came out with this comment and everyone stopped talking to look at her and see what she had to say. And I just thought it was a very nice moment as well. So good to see a woman for once in this election at these leadership debates.
And do we think this will actually make any kind of impact on the debate? I mean, for Labour, I guess it's, their campaign has not been going particularly well so far in terms of being behind in the polls. But I suppose, you could see from their reaction last night, this kind of desperate attempt to kind of come out and immediately slam this idea that they've been trying to do a deal with Reform, or even that there'd been a suggestion of a deal with Reform. They had all their kind of spinners taken to social media. That to me just sort of emphasised how potentially dangerous that is for Labour, that idea, among those people who are still supporting them.
Yeah, I think one of the things about this election is there's a huge amount of people who are either undecided or don't want to go out and vote at all. And I think these leadership debates, if they are designed to get those people into the polling station backing them, that's the main challenge here. And I'm not sure either the debate that we had at the weekend on the BBC or this Channel 4 debate, I'm not sure anyone's going to be particularly turned on to change their minds here about this. Perhaps if you're maybe flirting with the idea of voting Labour and you're really against Reform, you've now heard this, maybe you will move the dial a little bit and shift to what you're thinking. But I think the reality is there's a huge amount of people who are undecided, huge amount don't want to go out and vote, don't want to support any party. I'm not sure any of the squabbling and infighting that doesn't actually make a difference to how much money is in people's pockets or any difference to the NHS is really going to make them change their minds at this point in time.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. But Rachel, we should also say that you interviewed Allan Faulds of Ballot Box Scotland about all things to do with the Scottish Parliament election. So let's take a listen to that now.
When it actually comes to the actual vote accounting, how they decide who wins, how does that work in this election?
Yep, so the constituency element of it is counted and announced first because they need to know that in order to determine list results. That's what people are familiar with from UK Parliament elections. You count up the votes in each constituency and whoever has the most votes, whether they win by 1 vote or 10,000 votes, is elected the constituency MSP for that constituency, which is why it's not a fair and proportional system. You can have, and I'm expecting in this election, we could see people elected with less than 1/3 of the vote. So once they've done that for all the constituencies in the region, at the same time, after that, they will be counting up the regional votes in each constituency. And again, there's a really interesting thing here, which is if you follow, for example, the BBC's coverage, you won't see a breakdown of the regional vote by constituency, but that is done. And it's really interesting that that's kind of a missing thing because I know, because I'm a weird nerd who runs a website about elections, I know that in Glasgow, the Greens will get more votes in Glasgow South Side than they will in Glasgow, Easterhouse and Springburn. But if you're an ordinary voter looking at the BBC website, unless media improves its reporting this year, you'll just see the Glasgow regional results. So it's interesting. But once they've got both the constituency results and they've got all the regional results for each region, they can start going through what's called the D'Hondt process. And it sounds quite fancy, but actually genuinely it's maths we all learn to do in primary school. It's basic division. Much bigger numbers. We weren't normally working with 320,000 odd in primary school, but it is still simple division. And it works on the basis that for each stage of the count, you divide a party's regional votes by 1 more than the number of seats it's won so far. So at the start, if a party won 2 constituencies, you divide its vote by 3. When a party wins a list seat, for the next round, you account for that. So if a party's won 1 list seat, the next round their votes divided by 2, and so on and so forth, until you've got all 7 regional MSPs elected. And each region then has, in theory, 15 to 17 MSPs, which are proportional to the votes cast in that region, but crucially not proportional to the votes cast nationwide, which means you do still get some disproportionalities based on parties that maybe get a little bit more or a little bit less than they need in a given region.
I suppose, does that mean that if there's one party that wins all the constituency seats, are they not as likely to succeed in the regional vote, or is that a bit of a myth, for example?
So, that is basically true. And it's one of the flaws of this system, which up until this point hasn't been too bad. Most of the time, the list seats have relatively well balanced out the constituencies to give a fair and proportional result that's been correct. For example, the last election in 2021, only 4 seats went any different to the proportional ideal. The highest was in 1999 and 2003 when it was 7 seats different. We could be heading into this election with about 20 seats different because the SNP win so many constituencies. And the really important thing to understand about that, it's not that, it's hard for the SNP in that scenario to win list seats, or, it's difficult for them. Those voters already have their fair share. They've already got their representation in the constituency. And that's why, other parties then get on the list. That ensures we get that diverse representation that represents the diversity of voters.
Now, we very rarely get majorities in Holyrood. I think it's a 65-seat majority that John Swinney's got his eye on. Is that possible with this system?
So it is possible with the system, and this is, I suppose, an interesting to touch on one of the myths, I suppose, of the Scottish Parliament voting system, that it was designed to stop the SNP specifically from winning a majority. That's not true. The SNP support proportional representation, and crucially, so do the Lib Dems. The Lib Dems wanted a partly proportional system when we set up the Scottish Parliament, and that's what they got. And proportional systems just make it hard for any party to win a majority. It's not targeted at the SNP. The other aspect of that is that Labour, who still to this day at the UK Parliament don't support fair and proportional voting systems, they accepted it in Scotland because they thought, there's so many first past the post seats, we'll maintain a clear lead in those, and that will give us an inbuilt advantage. And obviously, as we saw starting in 2011, that went quite significantly against them. Yes, though, we are in that situation where the SNP at the moment could get something on the order of 60 seats, whilst being proportionally due 40. If they get a little bit more than that, they could get that 65 for a majority. It is mathematically possible. It'll be very hard, and unlike 2011, when people incorrectly talk about the SNP as having broken the voting system, they actually deserved that majority in terms of how the system works. This time around, if the SNP pulled that off, which I think is quite unlikely, but it is possible, if they pulled that off, they'd be sitting in a majority with about a third of the vote, which is very similar to the UK Parliament, and that's not how Holyrood's meant to work.
Can you tell us a bit more about your thoughts on first past the post?
I suppose one of the weird things about using that first past the post element is that, in addition to those disproportionalities that I talked about, potentially getting a majority on a third of the vote, it also does really weird things because you have to make sure each constituency is roughly the same size. And that's how we've ended up with Cardonald, which is in Glasgow City Council area, not being part of the Glasgow region. So you can live in Glasgow and not be voting for Glasgow MSPs in this election because we use a partly first past the post system. The best thing in my view would be to follow most European countries and use a simple and purely list-based system that could follow more natural boundaries, Glasgow, Ayrshire, Fife, rather than a kind of weird disjointed boundaries we have right now. And it could also take the form of what's called an open list, and that actually allows voters to pick between different candidates from each party in a way that first past the post doesn't, because you've only got one candidate, and if you're voting for that party, and most people vote on a party basis, you like it or lump it with the candidate, and the party lists at the moment are closed, so you can't pick candidates. So this would be a way of getting a more proportional system. It avoids that possibility of getting a majority that isn't really earned, and it gives voters more choice over who's actually elected to represent their area, and that area is also clear and consistent. You know what that area is. So the voting system we use for Holyrood is so much better than Westminster. It's so much fairer, but we could do a lot more to make it a fairer and more accurate system that gives everybody a voice.
That was Rachel talking to Allan Faulds of the respected Ballot Box Scotland. I should say that the deadline to register to vote is April 20th. So if you're listening to this podcast, you probably only have a matter of days left to register to vote. So please do get out there, do that. I think it literally takes a few moments to go onto the website and to do that. Yeah, I've actually still not done it myself, so I'm going to do it straight after recording this podcast. But until next week, thank you very much for listening.